Yes, I am.
Great.
And we are ready to start.
All right.
Okay, everyone, we will begin right now. Welcome to the Association of Catholic Publishers' third webinar of the 2017-2018 season. This one on growing the pie and exploration of the revenue models available to Catholic publishers. My name is Bruce Baumgarten. I'm the Director of Mission at St. Joseph's Catholic Community in Eldersburg, Maryland. I am pleased to be asked by the board of ACP and its Executive Director, Therese Brown, to be your host. I bid you good afternoon, good morning, or simply good day without exception for time zone. As usual, a few quick housekeeping details. As is standard with webinars, participant audio and video is muted, so all the resources can be directed toward the presenter. During the presentations, after this, I'll be muting my own audio as well. You're welcome to use the GoToWebinar control panel, that little control panel that's popped up when you began, to chat amongst yourselves. There's a chat window there. I'll be monitoring that. You can use that during the presentation. Some people like to multitask, others just like to focus on the presentation. So whatever your learning style. By the end, we will also be specifically soliciting questions. So to enable our presenter to focus on his material, I'll be monitoring and I'll be reading the questions, and then I will feed them to the speaker for his response. Special note, at the completion of the webinar, when this clicks off, GoToWebinar automatically loads a very short evaluation, just a couple quick questions, and I'd really, again, want to encourage you to take a moment to complete those so that we can constantly improve our product. In fact, there's a question in there, again, to name additional topics that we may address in future webinars. I hope you'll forgive me. I don't want to play favorites or anything, but for an opening prayer, I actually went to one of the resources that I buy from one of our members. In fact, Liturgy Training Publications does their Celebrating the Seasons resources during Advent and then Lenten Easter. And even my parish doesn't actually even provide these, but I always get a copy and I print them out and keep them on my front table. And so from this Sunday, this week, second week of Easter, is an opening prayer in there, and I wanted to use that as a way of beginning today. So let's remember that we are in God's presence, a loving and merciful God who calls us to this opportunity. God, a font of all life, through the paschal mystery of your Son, Jesus, you have restored your people to life. Our house gives you praise for your enduring mercy and unending love. Watch over and protect our community as we work to make known the message of salvation. Keep us one in heart and mind as we work to build up your kingdom. Give us hearts overflowing with mercy as we minister to those most in need. Help us remain faithful to your call so that our words and actions may always proclaim Christ as Lord. We make this prayer through that same Christ the Lord. Amen. Before we get going, or as we get going, want to invite you to take a short poll. I'm launching that now, coming up there. We know that from the web application how many people register, and we know how many people are like connected and everything, but we'd like to get a sense of how people are participating. We know that sometimes people are in with groups or with another person. I apologize for the very strict statement, I am alone. That was not meant to be an existential comment. It's just simply a physical reality. Okay, give it about 2 seconds more, or 2 seconds. 5% have voted. Okay, and then I will close this poll and we'll put up the responses. I'll share them with you. So, 84% of the participants are alone. Again, not a spiritual or existential state. And 5% viewing with another person, and 11% part of the group of 3 or more. So we welcome all who are with us today. And I'd like to invite, or I'd like to introduce, I should say, our presenter today. We're very, very lucky and pleased, and I'm excited for you, because we went through an entire rehearsal yesterday, so I know already in advance how much is coming your way. For those of you who don't know, Killian Schalk is, he uses coaching, workshops, and interim management to help magazines and other content creators adapt to a changing world. He and his company, Purple Gray, enable clients' existing staff to work across silos, to identify and leverage opportunities within their own workflows, and introduce continuous improvement techniques that make the changes stick. Killian's deep commitment to staff development, as well as his appreciation for how fear blocks innovation, his refusal to accept projects designed to reduce headcount. All that flows from his relationship with Condé Nast, where as managing editor for editorial development, he helped define and implement cultural change across 18 titles. At 11 years at The New Yorker, he was technical director of digital projects, where he was integral to the launch of the magazine's website, digital archive, and Kindle, Nook, Audible.com, and iPad editions. And he was also the youngest production manager in Rolling Stone history. In 2015, and this is especially interest for those of you who are America readers and have seen a lot of the changes there. 3 years ago, he began an interim engagement with America Media to spearhead the Moonshot effort that moved them into a position to lead the conversation about faith and culture in the digital age. A year later, as the presidential election came to a close, results included a new website, a redesigned print magazine, the transition from subscription to a membership model, relocated offices, and a spike in readers across the media. Killian was a recent book industry study group panel about workflows in the book industry. His article, Should It Stay or Should It Go? Church and State in the Modern Media Environment, is currently featured in the American Society of Business Publication Edition's April 2018 Ethics Update newsletter. And he spent the winter interviewing publishers for a webinar also for ASBPE entitled Mind the Gap, What Publishers Really Want from Editors. So I am going to introduce and bring on board our presenter, Killian Schalk. And Killian, your mic is open and your screen is on.
Hello, everyone. Hi, it's great to meet you. And Bruce, thank you so much for introducing me. I'm really excited about this conversation today that we're going to have. And please, if you have any questions during the conversation, please don't hesitate to contact Bruce and let him know. Also, if for any reason you are unable to hear me, or if I am somehow eating my words, let Bruce know as well, and he will speak directly into my ear and let me know. That will be very, very helpful. So today we're going to be talking about growing the pie and exploration of revenue models available to Catholic publishers. And you've heard a wonderful introduction from Bruce. Thank you for that. So we're going to go right ahead. So today's question is, what do publishers need? And the one thing we need to think about is what publishing is not about paper or devices or even content. Publishing is about community. And many of the publishers I've been talking to recently have focused on this. Content, be it books, magazines, or music, are simply a tool to engage and serve that community. And so where are we now? Where do we stand? So before, if we had an idea and we wanted to give it to a reader, we would make a book or lots of books. And sometimes we make music and sometimes we make magazines. And then with those books, we would put them on a truck, we would get them delivered. We take them to the store, get them directly to people's homes. We would spend a lot of money doing that, a lot of money. And that was our hill to climb. We had to climb these hills to get this to our readers. And it looks something like this. On the left here, you have an idea. And here are the hills we need to climb. Paper, distribution, transportation, get it to people's homes or the store where they can reach it and get it right to our friends, our home. And then if they enjoy what they're doing, they'll probably purchase some more, which gives us a little bit more ideas. And additionally, we just have a little bit of data. See here, and I make it very small here, data about what they like, but we don't really pay that much attention to just a small data right here. So this is where we were, and this is what used to happen. It was a safe place, and our main challenge was getting to the reader. And the competitive advantage you would have was to get the content to the customer. This portion, we just had to get it to the customer and we would be able to read, they would be able to read it to the customer. Now, however, things have changed. We have an additional hill to climb, and you may recognize it. You may have one in your hand. The phone has changed it for everyone, but especially for publishers. And let's talk about why. If we look at the same chart as we had before, we'll notice that before we have here the same thing that we had before. Paper distribution, printing, paper distribution, getting it to people's homes, but now we have an additional hill to climb. Are people's time, and do they want to read us? That's the question mark, right? Do they want to read us? And you'll notice that the line here, the folks who don't have this printing go straight to the phone or to the device in question, and all they have to do is convince someone to read them. And that's all they have to do. So now we're competing on this. So the competitive advantage is to be the most needed by the customer. So back here, we'll see that before we just needed to get it to the customer. Now we need to be most desired by the customer every single time. And they're still giving revenue to us, but it's a difficult situation, right? The revenue comes up and the ideas go by. So because this is the most needed by the customer, we need to think about new things. So first of all, this is new for publishers. Now, maybe a lot of the publishers, when I look at the surveys that you guys, thank you for sending it, we've been in this already. But inherently, we all have a level of quality, an idea of quality, and we have a legacy that we were trying to keep with us. And so our thinking was based on the old model, and now we need to transition to a new model. So this is new for publishers, but it's not for the digital companies that we're also competing with, that we're also competing for time, which is for all of our readers, the one resource, the one asset that they never can have enough is their time, their attention. So digital companies understand this, and they've been working this way directly for quite a while now. So our question is, how can publishers compete? right? How can we work together? How do we learn from them? How do we compete with this? And humbly, in my opinion, I believe that publishers need to be able to answer 3 questions. And this is so you can build products and develop new revenue generation, new revenue sources, so that you can continue to thrive. So these 3 questions are, how do we decide? And the question is, how do we decide what we're going to do? What new things we're going to do? And the reason why we need to think about this is that before we only had one channel. We focused on one, be it music, be it books, be it magazines, whatever. But now we have a multiplicity of channels. We can do all sorts of things, and we can do almost everything. Well, in fact, we can't do everything. We have to choose. And now choosing is a skill that we have to learn. What are we going to do? How do we decide? That is a skill that we need to learn. And we need to learn to not do it according to politics, internal. We need to learn how to do it from data and from what our readers want and what our customers need from us. So that's the first question. How do we decide? The second question is, who is our audience? Who is this audience? Who is this person that we're talking with? And how do we get to know this person to figure out what they need? And if we don't know them, we need to know them better, because the digital groups, as we're seeing right now in Facebook and in Congress, right now, they know a lot more about us than we do about them, about our customers. And that is something we're going to have to change. And the third question that we have to ask is, what are our options? What kind of things can we do? What things have worked? And according to some of the questions, what have other people tried and learned? And what can we learn from each other? So let's ask that question again. What are our options? So these are the 3 questions. How do we decide? Who is our audience? And what are our options? So we'll start with the first one. How do we decide where we're going to find new revenue? Said another way, what do we need to do to make good decisions? What things do we need to do to be able to, as an organization, make the right decisions that work for us? And from my experience, and from speaking to many people wiser than me, we need plan versus actual. Okay, so I'll explain what plan versus actual is, but essentially what plan versus actual is to think ahead what success looks like and then see what actually happens. Because sometimes it doesn't actually happen the way we want, and not everything works the way we want. But organizationally, individuals in organizations tend to say that everything is successful. They have the culture of nice. Everything is great. Everything worked out. But that's not true. Not every readers are not always equally interested in everything we do. So we need to learn what those things are. And a tool to help us through that organizationally is plan versus actual. The second thing is the learning cycle. And how do we learn about our customers and our readers, and how do we learn quickly? And the third thing we need flexible workflows. And we'll go into the specifics, but flexible workflows basically means up till now, we're very good at developing one channel products. But now we need to develop lots of different kinds of products and in different shapes and different manners according to what our readers might want. And we need to be able to do that on a short notice. So 3 things: plan versus actual, the learning cycle, and flexible workflows. So first question I'm sure a lot of people are asking is, what is plan versus actual? What is this thing and why is it important? And here's an example. If we look, this is plan versus actual. So the blue, imagine this blue line. This is a chart that could be any of our projects that we could imagine. It could be traffic, it could be revenue, it could be the number of people who walk into our stores. It could be any sort of data. And it could be engagement, the amount of time they spend with us. And the last 3, let's say last 3 months, last 3 years, we've got these measures, the last 3 days, depending. And from that, we can see that, well, we have a kind of, we don't do anything, we'll look like we're going to have this trend. This is what's going to happen. But this is our plan. If we do something different, if we do our new project, this is what we expect. And when we do our research, we expect it to look like this. So what ends up happening is with plan versus actual, we think ahead of what our success might look like. And then we're honestly looking at the data to see where it goes. Digital companies do this all the time. They plan ahead what they think might work or might not work. And they determine whether or not success has been happened, not because someone says it so, and it's not HIPPO, it's not the highest paid opinion that decides. It's what the data shows them. What does data shows about their readers? And that is a key part. It removes ego and politics from the decision making and allows you to connect directly to what your readers might want. Now, you have to ask good questions and you have to learn things, but this is a key part. So plan versus actual. So here, if you imagine, let's say we get into month 4, month 5, month 6, we might see the line go up and down like this. And we might say, oh, you know what? It looks like we were right. Oops, sorry. But if the chart went around here, just by the trend, it didn't actually increase that much. It would have increased anyway. So if we follow along here, we know that it actually didn't succeed. That what we did here didn't make a difference. And that's not wrong. It's not bad. It just means that we don't know what we were incorrect in our assumptions about what our customers want. And we learned something, and that's a valuable thing. So plan versus actual. It's a way for all of us to be honest about ourselves, about what's working, what's not, and how we connect with our readers and our customers. So the second question that possibly everyone has, or at least how I define it, is what is the learning cycle? Now, the learning cycle, if we take this simple chart, is simply a way for us to understand from our customers and to instill this knowledge within our organization. So it starts off, you make a plan, and everyone does this to some degree, right? You make a plan. Let's say that you're a book publisher and you think, well, you know what? We might want to do ebooks. All right, so we're going to make a plan to do ebooks, and we think that if we sell 1,000 ebooks in 2 months, these ebooks might be successful, or maybe 100 ebooks in 2 months. And so you do the test, you do it, and you check what actually happened. So like plan versus actual, you check it. So you might say, well, we only sold 40 books or 50 books. That's interesting. Why? All our studies would said we would have sold 100. And so you might check all the different assumptions and all the different ideas and see if there's other reasons. You might ask other people in the industries. You might find out what they did, how things might be different for you or not. But you would check. And let's say you learn something about your ebooks. And you say, well, you know what? We're not on Android or we're not on special other devices. So we're going to adjust because our audience happens to be different. We're going to adjust and we're going to try something different. So we're going to do ebooks, but we're going to put ebooks with a focus on Amazon or on the Kindle or perhaps on iBooks because our audience is more Apple-based. It depends. But this is the learning cycle. So you plan something and you see what might have happened, do, check, adjust. So this is the learning cycle. You can imagine that every product that we develop will go through a learning cycle. And this is something that every digital company does. Facebook, more than all of them. And if we want to talk about it afterwards, I can explain how. But the learning cycle, this is a critical skill. And we all have it to some degree. But because our products took so long to get to customers and come back, we may not have understood that the learning cycle has to be shortened. And this is how it works. And if you were watching me, you would see me making a circle with my hand like this. So why do we want to shorten the learning cycle? Why is it important to shorten the learning cycle? So if we go back to our chart, we'll see that we've added, we see that the learning cycle is here. And we see that this cycle, when the idea comes, it goes across either through the phone or through printing or music or whatever it is. We get the reader's attention and then we get some money back from them, maybe. And we get some data. But you'll notice now the data word is much bigger. And that's because the digital companies are focusing on data because this cycle now, instead of taking months up, as it would up here, it can take days or hours. And some can learn within minutes. If they have lots of data, they can learn within minutes or even seconds what's working, what's not. And so you'll notice that the learning cycle up here is probably in a months. Down here it's seconds, or maybe a day. And that gives us the opportunity to understand that this is what is allowing these digital companies to learn faster than everyone else and grow faster. It's because their companies are taking the data, large amounts, feeding into their ideas and trying new things all the time to see how they can get this hump to get to this reader. So you'll notice here, it takes us all this effort and money to get to this hump, while these digital edition groups are going straight through the phone and they're learning this fast. Okay, so this is the skill we need to learn, is down here. How do we learn quickly from our readers? And then the third thing we have to ask is, why flexible workflows? Why do we need flexible workflows, right? It's worked well, it brought great quality. And when we first was working in America, the question was, why would we want to change our workflow? Because it has worked for 107 years. It's done very well. Why would we want to change it? And why would we want to lose the quality? And the point is, we're not going to lose the quality. We have better tools now, but we need to be more flexible, and I'll show you why. We go back to our chart again. Now you'll notice that there are all these arrows that go across all the way. And you'll notice that here we have maybe 6 different arrows. Well, these are all projects. These are all projects that we've tried, and some didn't get very far, but we always learn something. And some get all the way to this hump, but they don't quite make it to the reader, and one of them makes it all the way to the reader. And the reason why we need to be flexible with our workflows is we need to be able to build lots of these experiments to see what will get through the gauntlet and to get to the reader. What does the reader respond to? And because we're going to have this learning cycle close up to see what they actually want. So we need to try lots of different things to see if we can get to that reader, and we can use their data to come back. Okay? So this is we're trying to develop the learning cycle in our own companies and in our own Catholic publishers, so that we can take that information, learn from it, and give them more of what our readers and our flock need. And that's the key part, what they need, what they want. And that brings us to the next part, big question. Who is our audience? Who are we speaking to? Who do we need to connect with? And if we extend this question, we find that we need to find out, what do you know about the audience? So this is all the data we talked about, right? The data like number of readers who read your content online, number of readers who read your content in books and ebooks, what's their age breakdown, what do younger groups do, what do older groups do, what kind of content do they like, is there breakdown male, female, frequency of meals, how does it relate to your mission, all these things. What do you know about the audience? And all this data you're going to have to collect in one place so you can start thinking about it and start really ingesting it and understanding it so that you can see what they want. The other thing is, though, that all that data doesn't give you a really important question. And that question is, why? Why are they doing these things? Why do they choose to read these things? Why do they choose to pay for one product you developed and not something else? Why? And that you can't get from data. You're going to have to ask them face to face. You're probably going to have to watch them. And often when you ask them, they'll tell you one thing, but they'll behave something else. So you need to be there and watch what they're doing and hear from their hearts and see what they really want. So why do they want to do, why do they do what they do? What do they need? Right? So you can see what they need and what they're missing in their lives. They may not say it, but they might say, oh, I might need a prayer book, or I might need something else. Who knows what those things are? But those of you who know your readers, what do they need? That's something, once you figure out the why, you see what they need, what their need is, which gives you what do they want. And what they need is often not articulated as what they want, but if you can figure out what they need and frame it in a form that ends up being what they want, you can actually start creating products that will actually help your groups and your individuals who are part of your community grow. So the first thing is, you saw those little gray dots, the little arrows going across. Before you build anything, ask and observe your customers and your audience, your readers. Ask, but also observe, because just asking them, they will often say something that to please you. But if you observe their behavior and see what actually they're doing, you might learn something that will be very helpful to help serve them later. And this comes to a pet peeve of mine: small steps. We're all ambitious. We all want to finish things quickly. We all feel like we want to do things as quickly as possible. But since we need to do lots of small steps, you'll notice there's all those little arrows. Since we need to do a lot of them because we don't know what's going to work, you need to take small steps. You need to try small things. Don't try to do everything at once, because the biggest waste, and I've seen this many times in many places I've worked, the biggest waste is building something huge that no one will ever use. And in a more crass way, the biggest waste is building something no one will ever pay for. Okay? So small tests, because you need to learn directly from your customers, but make it a small test. Don't invest too much. But now with technology, you can do small tests. Which brings us to our third question, the third big question. What are our options? So our options are all the different, how do we say, all the different products, the different ways we could bring new revenue, and we can build new revenue from our readers. And there are lots of options. There's plenty of cards, but now, as we spoke in the very beginning, the question is, what are we going to do, not what we're going to do within it. So for example, we can do all sorts of things, but we don't have the ability to do everything for everyone. So we have to choose. And so how do we choose which options? So sometimes you ask people. So like we did. Bruce sent you all a survey, and thank you all for answering. And this is the relative percentage of responses. And the question was, which of these monetizations would you like to know more about? And we asked this question because we wanted to know from you what you were interested in. And this is in order of decreasing interest, or what was stated, is what was answered. Now, I'm going to go down and we're going to talk through these, but I would notice one interesting thing. Sometimes people say they want to know about something, but they don't know what something is. So they may not answer in the positive. So just because these down here, classified syndication, special newsstand issues, evergreen archives, data packages, these are all things I've seen brands and books and publishing companies use. It doesn't mean that they're not interesting, but it does mean that right now, as a group, I'm making the decision that people responding to this will drive our decision making, but it doesn't necessarily explain why people didn't choose. So we're going to go with the first one, ebooks. So the most interesting thing I've discovered from ebooks from my discussions with folks is that ebooks are not only a way to repurpose a book that we know as print, but ebooks are also a fascinating way to learn more about our customers and our readers. And the reason is you can develop, while there is a lot of effort internally to develop ebooks, there is not a high cost to distribute and print ebooks. And so what you can do is you can develop these ebooks in different ways and use them to learn more about your readers and more about your customers and see what they might be interested in. So for example, let's say that there's a whole new type of book that you think might be really interesting to your readers, but you're really not sure if it's going to be interesting or not. And what I've seen some publishers do is they'll take I've seen this being done a lot in marketing groups, in marketing websites, you might have seen this, where someone says, oh, download our ebook about a very specific subject. And what's a good example? A/B testing. In technology, a lot of people are talking about A/B testing. How do you learn quickly? So let's say you were interested in A/B testing, and you saw on the website, oh, they have a special publishing A/B testing ebook. I'd be interested in that. So you enter your email and you get the ebook. Well, that ebook was designed for you, but it was also designed to help the publisher of that ebook learn who might be interested in this subject. Because sometimes what you really need to know is who's interested in a specific subject and how many of them are there. And hopefully getting close to why they are interested. So ebooks, I found, are not only a great way to repurpose and drive direct revenue, but they're also a way to learn about your readership and see what they might be interested in other things. Because if they're interested in the content, often they're interested in purchasing the content in any form. And that includes print or an event or something else. So it becomes a great way to learn about your readership and your audience and your community. Second thing, subscription membership. This is a special thing for me in the magazine world because recently, I think about 10, 15 years ago, when I was first, I remember when we launched NewYorker.com, there was a belief in the industry, and I don't know how many of you were out there in business then, there was a belief that content had to be free and that no one would read it unless it was free. And that drove a lot of publishers to put all their content as a mad rush to be on the web. And at that time, there were some publishers who said, no, we're not going to put everything on the web. We're going to keep things of some value. And 15, 20 years later, when the tools and the environment changed, suddenly the environment changed to one where people were willing to pay for content because they saw what happened without paying for content, right? Like we all have heard recently what happens, what it is when you don't pay for content. Well, it means that you're the product. And so you individually are the product and someone else is getting the value. So subscription membership is a way to ensure that what you are paying for is a value. So for a lot of folks who are looking for content in their community, they start seeing that it's a value to support it. And so part of the reason why I've seen magazines go from subscription to membership is that subscription is paying for a specific individual product, a book or a magazine at a certain regularity, while a membership is you're supporting the organization, you're supporting the mission. And a membership is a lot easier to change pricing because the thinking is more about the overall package and less about the individual products. So next thing, print digital subscriptions. I find these helpful, but mainly because they help connect the print experience to a digital one. I also find that they can be a lot of effort. And so I would make sure that and I say this as the person who helped launch the iPad for the New Yorker and for other magazines, I would say, please do small tests when it comes to print digital subscriptions. Try to see how much of your audience would be actually interested in it and see what happens. Because you can invest a lot of time and effort and sweat and tears. And sometimes your audience is there and you can build great revenue sources, and sometimes they're not. And internally, people, because they've have clung to it, they might continue to try to keep pushing it. And I would encourage you, please, small test to see if it's actually there. Lead generation. Some advertisers and some organizations are interested in finding who are the specific people who would be interested in a specific product. So for example, let's say that you are trying to find everyone who might be interested in buying a car. I'm just throwing it out there as an example. You might have a ebook or something else to say, are you interested in buying a car of this specific kind? Here, look at this ebook, or look at this website, or whatever it is. Well, ebooks and subscribers, you might discover there are specific people who are interested and would be willing to put their email out for a car ebook. And that gives you an idea of who might be interested. And you don't necessarily want to sell their name to the advertiser, but what you can do is give a very specific message to them with your advertiser, and that would allow them to see your advertisers to be connected directly to your readers, and the readers who are interested in contacting with your that advertiser can click on a button and they can follow up themselves. So that would be lead generation, and so that allows that's a key where ebooks actually help with lead generation. Podcasts, data point, Salon. Salon.com is a website that's been around for about 20 years, and Slate, they're very similar. However, Salon has had a success that Slate has not. Oh, sorry, Slate has had a success that Salon has not. Slate has podcasts, and they've discovered that over the years, 25% of their revenue is now coming from podcasts. And what's interesting about podcasts is because they're not as easily digital ads, it's not as easy to see what's going on and understand it. It's also a more protected conversation. There is a whole audience that has loved podcasts, and advertisers who have learned that these podcasts are actually very engaging for readers and listeners, actually listeners in this case. And I think that there's some examples of podcasts doing some great things. One example of a podcast finding a new audience would be Jesuitical. I don't know how many of you are familiar with America's new podcast, Jesuitical. However, that came about because when we changed the workflow, suddenly the assistant editors who are working on everything on paper all the time, suddenly, instead of working until midnight every night, they were only working until 8 every day. And so they said, well, we have a little bit more time. What can we try now? And the new thing they tried, well, it wasn't midnight, but it was late sometimes. What were the new things they could try? And it was a small test for a podcast to reach out to young people. So 3 editors, Olga, Ashley, and Zach, got together with guidance from the Jesuit priests there, and they started Jesuitical. And now if you go find them on Twitter, they're doing great, and they're growing, and they have gotten all sorts of guests and acknowledgement from lots of folks, including recently a favorite thing for me, ESPN, bracketology, folks who are big fans of brackets and college basketball. They had them on their show, and it is reaching out to audiences that you would never have thought. Well, I would never have thought. And so that is an example where podcasts kind of grew up into new things. Email newsletters, and I'll keep going here. Email newsletters are interesting simply because, like ebooks, they have the ability to help surface who might be interested in what, and if people might be interested in what, and if your readers might be interested. So email newsletters, especially, and here's another thing about email newsletters, please don't make it just a marketing thing. It needs to be editorial, or at least a combination. It's very easy to just ask your marketing team or marketing individual just to send out email newsletters one after the other, marketing new things. But eventually the reader, the open rates, the rate that people open emails goes down. I've seen this everywhere. And you have to put content in that people want to read, and that's your editorial groups. So your editorial and marketing groups need to work together on the emails, and that's not always easy. It's easier sometimes to divide them up and have them do each their own job. But in this new world, you need to combine the two. And you need to have content on those newsletters so that people continue to want to sign up for it and continue to open it and don't just write it off. Keep down digital advertising. I think this is not news to anyone, but it is very difficult to make revenue on digital advertising. What I've seen from and I've heard from publishers is pretty bluntly, ads, IAB ads, and normal digital advertising like Google and Facebook publishers are not making money off of that. That money is going straight to Facebook and to Google, and that is not going away. If you can sell your own digital advertising, that's possible, but I have not seen that work as well as people would like. I have seen sometimes people sell specific packages to specific advertisers. Sometimes you can get some revenue from there, but otherwise you are paying your click-through thousands. The size of your web traffic is probably not large enough, I'm guessing, to be able to focus on that. Now you can get some revenue, but I would not count on it as a growth method. Specialized web content subscriptions. So this requires a little bit more work on your website, but sometimes I have found, like there's if you go to my website, purplegray.com, if you look at the perspectives page, you'll see that there is a couple of blogs that I really like following, and one of them is called Stratechery. And Stratechery is a paid blog, and they basically give subscriptions for $100 a year. And it's a single person who writes the content, and it actually, because the content is so valuable to that audience, there's a large number of people who are willing to pay for it and receive newsletters on it. And if your audience is that specific and that engaged, it can be a strategy that works. But I would look at Stratechery. There's a couple other websites have done it, but Stratechery is one that I would recommend looking at. Events. I don't think this is anything that anyone's not familiar with, but if you have a community, you can have events. The events that I've seen, the more engaged the community is with your content and with you, the more likely your events and your high-level, high-cost products might succeed. But events are also a great way for you to learn about what they're interested in. So don't think of events as just a way to charge tickets. It's also a way for your editors and to meet your readers directly and to learn about them. Now, it's a subset of people who are your biggest fans, but if you find out that they have issues with something that you're doing, you can see it directly face to face. So please, events are not only a way for you to charge tickets, but like ebooks and email newsletters, it's a way to learn about your audience. And individual article purchases. I put this on the list because some magazines are starting to see that some articles are much more interesting than other articles and to their readership. And there's a small percentage of people who would be willing to pay their entire subscription just for those articles. And it's kind of like Stratechery. It's content. It's focusing on content as a value. And those individual article purchases, there's services like Later Pay and other things like that, which what they'll do is you basically, you can pay per article. And book publishers, I think obviously there's some people on this call who are academic publishers who probably have a lot of experience with this, and I would encourage you to talk to each other about this. But I have seen this in the magazine space, and I haven't seen it make lots of money, but I have a feeling that maybe in 2-3 years we might see this really grow. But that's, it could be, doesn't have to be articles, it could be an individual chapter, it could be any piece of content. Again, going back to why workflows need to be flexible, you can go to that. And then the rest, if you have really specific questions about any of these, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk about it. I'm going to raise just one thing about classifieds. I think classifieds have a potential. From what I'm seeing out there, there's a lot of classifieds that were open to everyone that are not succeeding as well, and the trolls and all those things are kind of destroying traditional old classified space. And I think classifieds for smaller communities really have a possibility. And these other discussions we'll go through later. I'm looking at the time, I'm realizing that I've been just talking for a lot, and I have with us probably the most exciting thing of all is PJ, are you there?
I am here, thank you.
Hi, PJ. So everyone, I want you've been listening to me for quite a while, But I realized when I was going through this list, um, one thing that we did not answer was a specific example of revenue, of new revenue that we and that you could talk about and see in your own industry, in your own group. So I was having a conversation with Therese and Bruce about this, they told me about Professor's Choice. And I was very excited because I was interested in like, oh, there's a new revenue source. How did they do this? And so I had a call with PJ on Monday, and within hours we had agreed that PJ should be part of this. And so I am thrilled to have PJ with us and talking about all the things we've talked about here, but also specifically, how did Professor's Choice come about, and how could this be a model for all publishers when they're looking for new revenue sources? So, first of all, thank you, PJ.
Well, thank you. And one of the ideas you've already talked about, Killian, is the importance of knowing your audience. And I can't highlight that enough because it's really how Professor's Choice, which is a division of our parent company, St. Mary's Press, was really born. And even though I think most of us that are online today claim our product line, whatever it is focused on our customer, oftentimes I think we come up with concepts or ideas that produce products we might think will sell and we think customers need. But in order to really meet the needs of our customers, it's really critical that we do three things. And the number one is listen. Don't tell, but listen. And that's kind of the plan and do phase that you talked about. And then
Yes.
number two, we find ways to be flexible in our thinking and our options instead of just finding different ways to market the same product, which fits in with your adjustment stage. And then we also, number three, do some user-centered design, which is something our company does quite often. And that's the check phase, where you go back and you test whatever you do to make sure that you're answering the needs and you're hearing your customers after you've listened. So the concept of Professor's Choice really came about because of two particular events that occurred. One really by happenstance, and the other because of an equipment upgrade. In terms of the equipment upgrade, St. Mary's Press had just changed out our press room and purchased equipment to become a print-on-demand center. And we were in the process of exploring how to use this technology kind of as a revenue source for creating new product rather than simply a cost center. And in the same period of time, our company president had a conversation with an individual that worked in a hospital system. And she was talking about the fact that the doctors in the department were complaining about the fact they wished that they could have all their specific research articles in one place rather than having to go to the medical white papers, the journals, their archive building, because it wasn't convenient and it wasn't really immediately available. And so what she did is talk to the doctors that wrote those articles, the writings, and told them she would pay them per page and compile little booklets for the particular people that requested them. So our company president was thinking about that example, and he thought about the fact that he'd heard and considered so many times from our educational customers that we serve that oftentimes it's not that they didn't like a particular book, but they felt a little guilty about asking students to buy a book or for purchasing a book when they only used one chapter or one piece of material from it. So he posed a very important question, and that is, what if? And that flexibility of thought that Killian, you talked about earlier, is really key. When we went back to our audience and we listened to what they asked for, and rather than saying, well, we have a great text that covers theological concepts you need to teach or that students need to learn, we asked the question differently and said, what if we get a listing from you of the material that you really want to put in front of your students, whether it's from a textbook, a magazine, a chart, or a map, and we put it all together in one book for you as a professor. It would be your choice, your class, and your text. And that's how our customized options through Professor's Choice really developed. And we really don't have, go ahead.
No, so you really don't have, I interrupted you. Go ahead. You really don't have, go ahead.
I was just going to say we really don't have a group of doctors like they did that worked for us, but we do have fellow publishers, all the publishers out there who, just like us, knew their materials were often being used or copied for reference. So we approached a variety of those publishers, and now we have expanded our community. As you say, we are a community to nearly 50 in our network, and we have permission to use their content, and we pay them permission fees for the works that we use. So instead of having sources copied at college libraries or high school offices and simply distributed to students, we save our educators time and money, save the students time and money, and we give them access to materials while providing the authors and publishers the revenue they deserve for the use of the content. So really our customers get a bound textbook that has the sources they need in the order they need them, and the students aren't forced to purchase 4 different texts for a course, for example, in which they'll only use a particular portion of that textbook. It's more affordable, and it creates a seamless, effective tool for teaching. And because of our print-on-demand system, what's really great is if a teacher, let's say, creates a text for a semester class and says, I found a new article that would really address this issue better for students and more effectively next time, we simply change that out. And in the next run of those texts, we create a brand new text with that chapter switched out for the upcoming semester. So it makes materials always relevant and always current.
So, I mean, this is super exciting for me because it's an example of when I was working at back at Condé Nast and at the New Yorker, there was the Cartoon Bank, and this is just another way. The Cartoon Bank was New Yorker's effort to resell cartoonists' cartoons, and the New Yorker made revenue from people buying T-shirts and all prints and all sorts of things from cartoonists, and even the cartoons that weren't published. So, for example, the cartoons that the New Yorker purchased but did not run, or the cartoons that actually never purchased but they were shown, those cartoons ended up in Cartoon Bank and they were able to be shown, and people started buying and making into revenue. I am not saying, and PJ, it sounds like, how many years has it taken to build a business this much?
Well, Professor's Choice has been here almost 9 years, and it actually has grown exponentially because of the fact that teachers of today, the market that we really serve is the high school and the college market in this particular division. But the teachers of today don't merely start on page 1 and go to page 300 of a textbook anymore. They find sources that are relevant to the topics they want to cover in their syllabus, and creating their own textbook is a great answer because they don't, again, have to have students carry many texts or purchase many texts, and they can use a number of different kinds of methodology to move forward in the learning process.
Yeah. So I think that the lesson that I've taken from Professor's Choice and from Cartoon Bank is, given time, a completely new business product, one of these small dotted gray lines that we see going across, can grow into a large business. For podcasts, for Salon, having 25% for the podcast, all of these organizations can find new things, and you don't know what thing is going to grow at the beginning. I mean, PJ, when your president was doing this, it's not only president who can come up with the idea, right? It can be anyone in your organization. And
exactly.
Often the folks who are not listened to, I mean, I find that the introverts often see things that the extroverts, I say this as an extrovert myself, the introverts sometimes have ideas that they haven't been expressed, and they might see something that are good to listen to. So to all of you, making sure, see if you can listen to your introverts and within your group and find what they see, and be willing to try and test small things, because if you're not everything is going to turn into a Professor's Choice or a Cartoon Bank or anything huge, but with those things probably had 10 or 15 other things that didn't work, but that was okay. And you don't necessarily know what's going to work with your readership. So PJ, I'm going to ask you to stay on because we might have questions at the end. Is that all right?
That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity.
No, thank you. I mean, hearing your example basically illustrate a lot of the concepts that I've been hearing from other folks has really helped me understand new things and actually changed a little bit my presentation. So thank you. So in conclusion, there are 3 things that publishers need to think about when you're thinking about new revenue. And I would love to hear if you have more additional questions after this, but specifically, one is, how do you make decisions? This is internally. How does your organization make decisions, and how do they make choices? And if it's based on data, it's not based on, it should be based on data, but not based on what I used to call this HIPPO. I mentioned this before. HIPPO was highest paid opinion. And the highest paid opinion, everyone in the room will often look, oh, the highest paid opinion said this, we should do that. Well, nothing against the highest paid opinion, but very often the highest paid opinion doesn't have all the information. And the data often does a better job of deciding. So please help your organizations learn what might work, might not, and it's not necessarily the highest paid opinion that can make the decision. 2, who are we serving and what do they need? So first, know who your audience is, who your community actually is, and find out what they need. And as an example, I'll go no farther than Professor's Choice. PJ and her team looked at who they were serving and what did that group of people need. And they had a concept like, oh, doctors in the hospitals, they need these little packets. Maybe it could apply somewhere else. And they asked the question who and what, and they found a pretty amazing solution and journey. And third is, what can we test? And this is a key part. Please don't throw everything in on one gamble. Okay, this is not a gambling game. This is playing little bits of just trying little things all the time, learning little things all the time. The little tests that don't take a lot of time to try and don't take a lot of money either. The faster and the cheaper these tests are, the faster you'll be able to learn. And with new technology, you can reach and try new things very quickly and just learn what is going to happen. So that's what can we test, and I would add to that, quickly and cheaply. And in the end, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who's participated, who's listened. We're still going to have questions, but before we go into questions, I wanted to just take a moment and say thank you to Therese, thank you to Bruce, thank you to PJ for having me on this webinar. I've learned a lot actually in the last week or so, 2 weeks going through this and preparing. And I would also want to say thank you for all of you for listening for this the entire event. And thank you also for your questions, because I learned from those. And if you have, any of you have any questions or any thoughts about how you can move forward and or some of these ideas, I would love to have conversations. You can find me on Twitter, you can find me on email, find me on websites. I'd be love to have conversations. So thank you, but thank you to all of you for, and also I would like to have a thank you to America. They trusted me with a really big part of their project, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you to all of them. So
well, thank you.
With that, Q&A, yeah, thank you. So Bruce, I hear your voice.
Yes, I am back. And let me ask to all the participants out there, questions, thoughts, insights, and send them out, and I will convey them over. We got first one up here. So, Kelly, what is the best way to conduct a test? You talk about, before putting everything into one basket, and maybe failing with that, do some testing. So what's some of the best ways to conduct that kind of test?
I would say the first thing I would do is learn everything you can, Google everything you can about it, right? And it really depends on what you're trying to test. So the key part is learn everything you can and learn what assumptions are built up around that test. So for example, let's say that if you're St. Mary's Press and it's 10 years ago and you're trying to figure out, would people be interested in packets, right? Would they be interested in buying individual packets? And is this going to affect our larger book business? And would it affect any of these things? Well, if you're going to do a test, one of the things you would do is first ask a lot of questions and learn as much as you can from asking. But a small test, I would ask first, but then I would do the small test after you ask, because even if people tell you something when you ask them, they often sometimes are being nice, and you can learn things from your test that you wouldn't be able to learn from just asking people. So what would be a good test is make sure you have a good plan, and you say, if we do this test and we get a result of 500, let's say, we're going to try something different. We're going to think our hypothesis was correct. But let's say that we only got 100. Well, doing a good test means you're willing to assume that what you thought was the case is not. Or there's something else happened. And being willing to, it's funny, one of the publishers said, it's okay to fail fast, right? You know, they were talking in terms of publishing, they were okay to fail fast. But you had to be willing to accept it and learn from it. So it's whatever you end up doing the test, make sure it's quick and that you learn from it. And it's always okay to make mistake once. Making the same mistake more than once is the problem. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And more of them just popping up here. So
okay, great.
Let me ask. Second thing, what other than an ebook, other ideas for good lead generators?
Good lead generators other than ebooks. I find that people often will join, for example, webinars, right? Webinars and other events that involve connecting with people. Often, even if it's just like a online thing or whatever, that you can determine if someone's going to be interested in something by that. So webinars would be something. Let me look at the list of back here and see if there's anything else for lead generation, if it prompts my ideas here. I would say sometimes you can do it with articles, but it's hard to track who's seeing things. Podcast, the same thing. It's really most effective. You need to be able to identify who's looking at the thing and when they're interested. Email newsletters can be done with lead generation. That's a quick. They have a short enough learning cycle to make it work. That would be something else I would try for lead generation. Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so.
For everyone. For everybody, if for whatever reason I don't answer the question, please feel free to email or message Bruce right now and say, no, I was hoping for something blank. Please feel free to do that, because I found that in previous webinars that actually helps clarify for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. And for saying that, I love technology instantaneous, because the questioner goes, so far so good. Okay. Immediate feedback. I'm going to jump to a different participant here, which I think is a fascinating question. Should we get authors to include in their book proposals ideas for testing and involving the community that would be served by their book?
Okay, imagine I'm writing this in all caps and yelling at the top of my lungs. Yes, yes, yes. That's wonderful. Especially, we used to have an expression that authors know their subject and editors know their audience. I think in this case, the authors might be able to say, they often get really cool ideas for books, but no one knows if it's going to work or not. And the author could participate in a small test of like writing a small ebook chapter or blogging about something or whatever to show that there is interest, right? Now, it's difficult for some authors that they're not very good at marketing and it's hard for them to reach out. But having a conversation with them about saying, well, if you think there's interest, how can we find out? So I think that's a wonderful idea. Whoever thought of that, thank you. And please, getting everyone involved in thinking this way and reaching out to your readership, I think is a wonderful way to go. Thank you for that question.
Excellent. Question back in the real publication of content, linking print and ebook purchases. What is the value, if any?
Okay, I have not done enough research myself, and PJ, if you have any specific interest view on this, please let me know. What I have experienced myself and what I have seen very tangentially is sometimes you want to be able to like have the book in your hand to read long term, but you want to have a quick chapter quickly. And so I have found like for business books, at least for myself, I sometimes will order the combination because I want to read one chapter right away, but the 300 pages I want to read on paper later on. So at that point, I like that bundling. I would do a test to see if people would be willing to pay more for a specific book on digital, and see maybe there's special digital books or ebooks that they would be willing to do both. I'm not convinced that everyone would want that, but I think actually you might discover that a certain part of your audience would, and why they would want it. It might be that, like, if you're a student, you might want to have the ebook as a reference, but you'd want the print book at home so you can read it carefully. I'm not sure, but that would be an example. Maybe the combination of being able to refer to it if it's a book that's designed to be referenced, for example. I'm sorry, I don't feel like I really answered that question as much as the person might need. PJ, do you have anything to add to this? Is there something that you might think?
I think what I'd add is I very much agree with you, Killian. I think sometimes it's a personal preference. We often find that if someone wants it in digital format, they'll ask, can I get both? Is it the same price? So the question does come up, and I think if you create some kind of an option available for the customer, then they have that to choose from. As you say, some people often just have their preference is digital only. Other places, they want print only. And sometimes in our market, schools, they're a digital school and they have to have it digitally. So, but some students don't do well with a digital format and they need print. So if you have it as an option, that's probably the best thing you can do is create options, again, that flexibility factor.
Got it. And to figure out if those options actually work. Okay.
Yep.
So
I was
please,
going to say, I'll throw myself in too as another example of, and from the world of having done business and reading web design books. There's one particular publisher who always links their stuff together, and man, if I've got the money, I always do that because I like a book in my hands, and yet, and I don't know if this is me when I'm traveling. Since I don't want to have the extra weight of this stuff, well, this way I can get to it on my phone or a computer or something. I love it, but I think it's the testing that's going to tell you. So we've got more questions. I like to when it can cut to, give me the answer. Well, here's the question: is what is the single biggest mistake we need to avoid when making the shift from print only to digital strategy?
Single biggest mistake to avoid. Oh, this is a good one. Okay. I would say, and I'm going to speak universally now, focusing on, let's assume that someone is organizations are legacy print organizations and moving to like a digital first kind of, and with the print savvy. I would say, oh God, it's tough. I would say, assuming that your audience will be the same. And I say that because when you go digital, you'll discover that there are people who were not interested in your print stuff that are interested in your digital, and vice versa, right? So a lot of organizations did not want to have things on digital or on the web because they thought they would lose part of their readership, right? People wouldn't pay for it. And in general, what I have found and heard is that the number of people who do both are really not as high as you would think. And so the biggest mistake I would be assuming that the audiences are going to be the same would be, I think, the biggest one. Can I add a second one? Am I allowed, Bruce? Or do I have not have time?
Oh, yeah, I think we'll give that to you. Yep.
Okay. The second mistake I would have is organizations who often were on print, they were insulated from their audience, from results, because of the long cycle time. So, for example, in magazines, I can't speak for books necessarily, but in magazines, if it was a monthly magazine, you might have an idea in May and it might appear in print and the reader might read it and write a letter about it in November, right? So the cycle times are very, very long for some of these magazines, take the time it takes to get a story and the rest of it. And that length of time meant that the editors often didn't rely on data and they relied on their gut. And I would say that's especially the highest paid opinion would often rely on their gut and say, oh, I think we should do this, because they didn't have data. And I think being able, I wouldn't say let data decide everything, but I would say it should inform the decision making and realize, and this is kind of a personal thing for individual people who are looking at changing their decision making, realize what role data has as part of your conversation. I remember, again, with America, Ashley McKinless, one of the editors who's now doing Jesuitical, we had a conversation about what data, what America would use data for and not. And it was a very interesting question. And I would encourage everyone to think about that. So, all right, long extended, I love it how everyone wants me to say one thing and I'm giving three. So there you go. That's my answer.
Great. I have another question, and this struck a thought and a question in me too. Is the question is the increase in Audible a cause for the increase in podcasts, related and cultural? And like I say, I've been long enough around that as the internet was starting. I remember when podcasts began way back when. And it was so big, and then it seemed like they kind of went down. And now my 26-year-old daughter, just never stops telling me, Dad, you got to listen to this. Dad, you got to listen to this. You should hear this. And she's just on to podcasts like there's no tomorrow. So is there a sense that has some of that, has Audible increased? Has there been a relationship there, or how do you see that whole development going on?
I would say I don't think it's Audible necessarily. When people talk about digital, they often talk about it as a thing. Like there's iPad and web and podcasts. Digital is the transformation of everything that we had before into new things. So podcast is the digital version of radio, right? And of talk radio and all these things, right? These conversations that were happening. Webinar is a conversation, is another version of talk radio. You could think of it like, right? These are all digital is a transformation of what was before. And I think what happened was people started discovering that the emotional connection people have from listening to each other could translate to podcasts, and the tools became universal enough where everyone started listening to each other, and then enough business models, enough content providers were be able to be supported by them. And I think it moved from radio to other places, but it was this. I think it was there all along. It just people moved from listening to things on the radio on AM and FM to listening to things on their devices. And so I think podcasts is just an articulation of that. So I would say Audible, if anything, is a beneficiary of that. I wouldn't say it's because of Audible. I would say it's a beneficiary of the larger trend, if that makes any sense.
Great, fascinating. Okay, questioner. Although let's see, the question was saying, what's first step we should take as we begin to shift to creating content in digital form to be used across platforms. And maybe this is a different webinar. It sounds like I think it would actually be an excellent. My thought was that it would be an excellent idea for a future webinar. But I know, Killian, as you spoke about the workflows, that maybe this is something that you could speak to a little bit as we begin to shift to creating the content in digital forms, using it across platforms. What are the first steps in that process?
Okay. First of all, I would love that. We could go on for hours, and I've had lots of conversations with many people. So if you would have me back, that would be I would be happy to do that. Or if I'm not if you want somebody else, I can recommend other people. But I would love to do that. But to answer your question, what is the first steps? The first steps I would do is see what's happening now. Right? Just look at what's actually happening. And I do this in my own practice when I'm working with groups, is you take a workflow and you make sure you see, everyone understands what's happening now, because often people don't actually see it. It's not actually workflows get kind of like passed on as oral tradition, and no one really sees it all at once, and people can't explain other parts of it and why. And so I would say the very first step would be just see it, make it visible, and make it universal to everyone. One thing I would recommend when you do that is make sure that you have trust among each other at that point, because it can be very nerve-wracking for everyone to see what they're doing out there all at once. I mean, that's part of the reason why we don't do projects with job reduction, because personnel reduction, because that fear blocks the openness and the thoughtfulness that you need to grow, and for people to be able to change what they're thinking of doing. What you want is a situation where their employment is safe, but what their job is going to change, and it's going to change because customers are changing. But having people fear that they're going to lose something, that doesn't work. So to answer your question, I think there's a lot of things to do, but the first thing I would do is look internally and just make it visible. Make what you're doing visible, and go from there. And I do this for a business, so I'm glad to pitch this. But I would say, even if you never call Purple Gray, just make it visible, and that's your first step.
Sounds great. Great. That is good. Perfect timing too, as we get to we're at the end of the questions. I have some wrap-up reminders, but let me just ask Killian for the last 30 seconds or so. Do you have a concluding comment or thought?
I would say that it is finding more revenue in this time and age is stressful, but can also be very exciting, because you can connect with readers and your customers in ways that you've never had before. And I would, we all live, and we're all human beings, and we need to live through our communities. And often we're in this business because we want to be closer to our communities. And I think that hearing from them and hearing what their needs are and serving them fulfills your mission, and I think can also fulfill your business needs as well. And I think that that's tying the two together is something that I've loved watching, and I encourage all of you to listen and to hear each other, hear the introverts in your group, and make it visible. And I think that we'll all succeed. And most of all, thank you all very much, and PJ and Bruce and Therese and America for bringing me in as well. Thank you all.
Great, great. Folks, before we adjourn and click out, just ask you to please note the following. There is a recording. As you know, these recordings of the webinar, they're always made available to you. As soon as they're processed, you get an automatic email from GoToWebinar. That'll alert you, so you can have that available. Go back into it or send somebody else to it. early invitation, please join us for the next webinar. We'll be on how short-run printing and print-on-demand changed and will continue to change what and how we publish. And that's scheduled for Wednesday, July 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So mark your calendars now for that. Also, again, remember, please take a moment to complete the evaluation. That'll appear when we click out and the webinar is concluded. And finally, thank you to all of our viewers and participants for joining us today. A special thank you to our presenter, Killian Chalk of Purple Gray, and to our guest, PJ Thompson of Professor's Choice. Once again, this is Bruce Baumgarten on behalf of the Association of Catholic Publishers. Peace be with you. Thank you.